Hello, this is the Dreadweaver. Prepare yourself for an evening of horrifying tales that will weave webs of terror in the darkest corners of your mind. If you're a fan of stories of mystery, true crime, paranormal, or anything that crawls in the shadows just beyond our sight, you've found the right place. This week, we have several terrifying true stories, as well as the most recent updates on the Jack the Ripper case. Has he finally been identified, or will his identity forever be a mystery? If you like what you hear, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications. All of these actions tell YouTube you want to hear more from us. And with that, let us delve into the darkness. Story 1. The Vision. I previously shared a story in which I worked in an emergency department during my residency that was haunted by the ghost of a little girl. This story takes place in the same community emergency department as the first story, with the clock that was thrown from the wall in room 18. This happened during my last year of residency. I was taking care of an extremely sick older woman. She had unfortunately suffered from a perforated bowel and was dying of sepsis. She was barely conscious. Again, we were sitting in the fishbowl of the emergency department. The patient was in room 9, right in front of me. We were doing everything we could to try to save her, but she was too far gone and needed emergent surgery and would most likely not survive regardless. I remember being in room 1, grabbing equipment to perform special venous access to a central line. I came out of the supply closet behind room 1 and went to cut through the fishbowl to get to room 9. The fishbowl was set up so the back row looked like old-school study carrels, made of wood, about 3 feet high. It was not glass like the front of the fishbowl, so I cut through the back of the fishbowl with my stuff and turned the corner in front of room 18, then jumped and paused. As I turned the corner, going around the last study carrel, I saw a man sitting there wearing, for lack of a better term, an old-time Sunday suit in a color I can't describe, paired with a brown fedora. I almost walked into him and wasn't expecting him to be there. Just as quickly as I saw him, he was gone. I tried to convince myself that nothing was there and that I was just tired from not sleeping well due to working the night shift. I didn't see his face, but my mind filled in the blanks as belonging to an older, senior man. I was a bit shaken, but still had all of these supplies in my arms. I stood there trying to process this, and the nurse from room 9 called me over because the patient was getting worse. I walked into the room to do the central line, but something didn't sit well with me. It kept bugging me, and I couldn't concentrate. I had this strong desire to stop what I was doing and call the family. So I told the nurse to keep the fluids going, and I was going to call the family. I spoke to the patient's son, who just happened to be a physician. He said he didn't want us to do the central line. He didn't want his mom to suffer, and that we were to keep her comfortable. He said she had been through so much, and the dementia had gotten so bad that even if she survived the surgery, she'd never be the same. He said he was on his way. He only lived a few miles away and would be right there. I went into the room and updated the nurse, who looked visibly upset. I attempted to explain to her why this was the right choice, and that we were changing her code status to do not resuscitate and no escalation of care. She shot me a look and said she understood what was going on. She quickly left the room and didn't return. It was a very odd interaction, and I thought maybe I had somehow insulted her. The patient's son, daughter-in-law, daughter, and son-in-law all showed up and sat with her, and for the next 90 minutes, we made her comfortable and helped her pass with dignity. I noticed that the nurse that was previously taking care of the patient was no longer involved in her care, and that the charge nurse was the only one in the room. The elderly woman died. I came into the room to pronounce her, and the family was crying and telling her to go with Dad, and that Dad is waiting to see her again. I gave them my condolences. The son came out and thanked us for not letting her suffer, and said that things were never the same after her husband died. She had dementia, and her husband had taken care of her until he died of a massive heart attack about 7 years ago. They had been married over 50 years when he died, and when they took her in, they could see the cognitive issues slowly progressing. Later on that night, I found the charge nurse speaking with the original nurse, Elizabeth. I walked in and apologized for upsetting her, and Elizabeth said that wasn't the issue. She said that when I left the room to call the family, she turned around and saw a man wearing a hat leaning over the patient, and he disappeared when I called out her name to update her on the patient's code status change. She was shaken to the core and couldn't finish her assignment, and had to go take a prolonged break to process what she saw. I stood there staring at them and said that I had seen a man with a brown fedora and suit but no face. She told me she couldn't see his face either, and that he was hazy, so she couldn't tell what color anything was. We had all come to the conclusion that this man was her dead husband who was there to cross her over. I had wished the family was still there so I could ask them if their father ever wore a brown fedora. I even fought the urge to call them. I didn't know what I would say if they said, "Why, yes, how did you know that?" "What are you supposed to say?" "Oh, no reason, we just saw your dead father's ghost hanging around, that's all." Anyhow, that was my second ghostly encounter. There were no chills, no cold breezes, no hair standing on end, just an odd feeling of disbelief and then acceptance that there are things we just can't explain. It was also the beginning of an unfortunate spiral of curiosity and events to come. Story 2. A Dangerous Decision. This happened ages ago, but I am now recollecting bits and pieces from that event, and I'm thankful to be sane and safe. I'm honestly just airing it out so I can get input and opinions because I don't know what to make of it. I'll preface this by saying that this happened a while ago, back in 2019, when I was 16 years old. Hence, I was very naive and gullible. I am aware that it might not be a human trafficking case, but it does seem suspicious regardless. For context, this happened in a relatively large North American city. It was late December, a few days before Christmas. I had just finished hanging out with my friends and was using public transit, the subway, to get back home. My friends lived in a different area, so I had to travel back alone in that direction. The subway wagons were mostly empty, and it was already dark out. I recall it being around 8 to 9 p.m. maybe. I was sitting on an individual seat, and the setup was structured in a way that I had another seat perpendicular to my current one, which was empty. A guy, who looked to be relatively young, plopped down on that adjacent seat and greeted me with a smile instantly. I didn't think too much of it at the time, since, in all honesty, I thought he was cute. Physically, he had a middle part, chestnut hair, and was relatively tall and very slim, and had nice facial features too. I don't remember his face in a very detailed manner, but I remembered thinking he was really cute. He was dressed in a sweater and jeans, didn't look disheveled or overly casual either. Upon sitting down, he greeted me, smiling, introduced himself, and shared his name. We then started making small talk, and he brought up the fact that he had finished university, which prompted me to ask for his age. He claimed to be 24, which seemed to match with his appearance. What really creeps me out is that, in response, I had told him I was 16 years old, and he didn't even seem slightly fazed by that. As a matter of fact, he was smirking and had formed a small, visible grin, talking about how he missed being this young and advising me to stay in school. He proceeded with asking me about what I was doing alone in the metro, my plans before that, and if I had any plans coming up in the next few hours, to which I stupidly answered no. He then started expressing how his friends had come up with this supposed dare, where he had to bring a random girl over, a complete stranger, to their party hangout by accosting them randomly, such as this very occasion. I remember finding it hard to believe, so I insisted on going home about a handful of times, to which he started pleading with me, claiming it would be fun, and if I were uncomfortable, he would bring me right back to the subway station. I kept insisting that my mom would get mad and asked him if there was another day where we could do that, but he answered that it was a one-time thing, saying that it was a very uncommon gathering, that he hadn't seen these friends in a long time, and most likely wouldn't see them after the event because of a full schedule. He also kept pushing the fact that he wouldn't keep me up for too long. I eventually gave in. I know, super stupid. I still can't believe it to this day. We had gone through a few subway stations and got off in a pretty desolate area, which was known for drug use, prostitution, and poverty. But to be frank, I didn't know that at the time, although it was pretty obvious. That specific neighborhood still has a pretty tarnished reputation to this day. The guy, let's call him Ben, then revealed his real name to be different than the one he had initially given me, and was seemingly Slavic. The name he revealed is most likely fake too. He then started asking me some pretty intrusive questions, such as, what are your darkest secrets? What's your home life like? What's stressing you out right now? Why did you decide to come along? He claimed to like getting to know people beyond the surface level, hence why he was being this intrusive. I, in all honesty, was a straight-A student, so I simply told him that studies were my main concern as of now, to which he answered that there had to be more than that. We had to be about 15 minutes in at this point, when a car slowed down next to us and rolled its windows down. A man yelled out, "Hey," but was immediately shooed away by Ben. Ben then told me the man was a supposed John, which I didn't know meant that the driver was essentially a client in that sense. I started to get wary of the situation, but still made it to the hangout a few minutes later, which was located in a regular townhouse. It wasn't worn down or anything. I was greeted by maybe 5 or 6 dudes who were seemingly over 25. 2 of them looked above 30 as well. They all stared me down and immediately asked how old I was, and I told them I was 16. One of the guys seemed sort of weirded out and said to Ben, "Come on, man, that's my sister's age. They might even be in the same high school." They all kind of laughed it off and moved on. They never spoke about it again and barely asked me any questions except for, "How did you guys meet?" Also, it was obvious that someone's dad owned the place, as an old man was dozing off on the couch. We were all gathered around a dinner table. The host served me some food along with the other guests, but I refused to eat, as honestly, I was starting to feel a bit queasy about the situation. After everyone except me finished eating, we all went upstairs. Ben started playing the guitar, and another man joined him by playing some keys on the piano. They then asked me to film them using Ben's phone, so I did. When that was going on, I honestly started getting terrible vibes and felt the need to leave, so I put the phone down and slowly made my way through the frame of the door. One of the older guys was standing near it and asked me what's up, and if I was enjoying their company. We started talking for a minute, and he claimed to be an accountant. He then started leaning in and tried to slightly hover over me against the door frame. However, I stepped back into the staircase and made it to the front door, opened it, and went out to the driveway. Luckily, the door wasn't locked. Ben followed and asked me if I wanted to leave. I immediately said yes, and this time, he didn't insist on bringing me back in. I should also add that right before leaving, I had told Ben that my mom was relentlessly calling me and was worried, to which he obliged. On our way back, he proceeded to ask me if I was genuinely 16 and not below that. He told me that if he were my dad, he would never let me out of sight again, because what I just did, which was going to the party in the first place, was the dumbest thing he'd seen any girl do, especially since I had no reason to do that, according to him. Once he accompanied me back to the subway station, I asked him for his Snapchat. I was a complete moron. Or any other type of social media he had. He told me he doesn't use his phone like that and was fully off the grid. I went back home and never heard from him again. Although I didn't get conventionally harassed through violence or sexual endeavors or anything like that, and it's a pretty outdated happening, I'm honestly scared I could have been a potential victim of some sort of crime, including human trafficking. That might be a stretch, but you never know. I want to know if there's any way I could leave an anonymous tip to the city or something. I was searching through public records, but couldn't find anything. What do you guys make of this? Story 3. Followed at the Park. I grew up in a very small town next to the Mexican border in America. My family had taught me about being cautious of human trafficking or drug traffickers in our area because of recent cases. I'm not quite sure if that's important to the story, but it definitely helped with how I acted. My best friend and I, who were both 14 at the time and in high school, decided to take a walk in a nearby park. It was a very popular park, and it was in walking distance from both of our houses, so off we went. As we were walking around and talking, a grown man in about his 40s came up to us. He said he was new in town and didn't know where anything was. My friend and I gave each other a look of slight nervousness, but kept our cool. We didn't engage him much in the conversation, but it was getting more and more uncomfortable. He asked if we went to the local middle school that was down the street, and I said we were high schoolers, but didn't mention which one. It already bothered me that a grown man wanted to talk to who he thought were middle school kids. Then I noticed something and gave my friend a signal with my eyes. There was another man behind us, also following us. I wouldn't have even noticed him if the guy talking to us didn't give the guy a smile when I confirmed that we were underaged. This man kept his head down when I looked back and wore a hat, seemingly to hide his face. As we walked around the park, the first guy kept asking questions, and the second guy didn't stray too far and didn't even try to act as though he wasn't following us. This was getting to be too much for me. The first man's questions were either about our small town or about our lives in the town. Nothing too invasive, until he asked for our phone numbers. This was almost 10 years ago, and smartphones weren't really a thing. I had a flip phone. We were broke teenagers. My friend claimed she didn't have a phone. I can't remember if this was true or not, but I do remember knowing I couldn't say the same due to being on my phone and fiddling with it. It's a flip phone, so there isn't much to do on it in the first place, so I just admitted that I'd rather not give out my number. He started telling me things like, "Oh, come on, why not? You girls can show me around town." Things like that. I just explained I had limited texts and minutes, so I don't give out my number easily. This is when I noticed how dark it was getting outside. His questions kept us stuck in the park till dark because we were too scared to try to walk home and out of a fairly popular park where there were other people who we could run to if it got worse. These guys were much bigger than us, and we didn't find anyone we knew. I knew we couldn't keep delaying, so I decided to just bite the bullet. I told him it was getting too dark and we had to start heading home, then directed my friend toward the edge of the park to our houses. But that didn't stop him. He followed after, saying he could drive us home and we wouldn't have to walk. I lied and claimed it was just down the block. It was about 5 very long blocks away. Google says it's a 20-minute walk. He claimed he wouldn't feel right just letting 2 young girls walk home alone, and then he pointed at a nearby parking lot, saying, "Look, my car's not too far. Let me just drive you home." At this moment, I noticed the second man following us was suddenly 2 or 3 steps behind us instead of the distance he had been at. Nope. Not dealing with this. I said it was faster if we just walked, then quickly said, "Bye, nice to meet you," and sped off. My mom always taught me to be polite, and looking back, I wish she hadn't. Ladies, don't be polite to men that creep you out. I was too young, but if this happened now, I wouldn't have been so polite. My friend and I speed walked across the street, only to see both men hurry to the parking lot. I didn't think much about them hurrying away, only feeling a rush of relief that they weren't following us anymore. That relief, however, was short-lived. We were on the left side of the road. While walking, we noticed a van turn onto the street on the right side of the road. It was them. They were on the opposite side of the road, but they were hardcore staring at us as they drove by, only to do a sharp turn at the end of the block. Feeling a bit wary, we decided to cross the street just in case. It was the right decision. They came right back to the road. Luckily this time, we were on the right side of the street and they were on the left side. These streets were pretty big, so they couldn't just drive on the opposite side. More stairs as they drove past, only to do another sharp turn at the end of the block. There was nothing for us to do in the middle of this long block, except to hide and hope for the best. We ducked behind a car parked in someone's driveway and waited. An old lady spotted us and seemed suspicious, but didn't say a word. She watched the street as well, and the same van went by. We couldn't see them at our angle, but knew it was the van. The van drove by much slower. We felt like it was taking forever for them to clear out the block. "They left. You should be good," said the old lady. We thanked her and then ran toward where we lived. My friend lived closer than me, so after I made sure she was home safely, I ran non-stop all the way to my house. I kept my eye on the street for vans, but they either lost us or gave up. I still have never been more scared than that night, running 2 blocks home in the dark by myself. Story 4. My Sister Came Home by A Kelly Clarkson Song. I'd like to start by saying that my parents' house has a long history of sporadic, strange events. A few years ago, when I still lived there, I was hanging with my mom in her bedroom. We heard my sister coming home. See, she had a routine. 1. Park her car. 2. Open the steel fence. 3. Open and slam the front door. 4. Throw her keys onto the counter. 5. Run into the bathroom. 6. Come to my mom's room. We heard it all. I even said, "Ugh, your daughter is here." I was always annoyed by the loudness, and we waited. A few minutes went by, and she didn't come in, so I went to take a look. Her dog was waiting, as usual, outside of the bathroom. The light was off, and the door was slightly open. I stood there, didn't hear a sound, so I knocked a few times. No answer. I got worried and opened the door, but she wasn't there. I went to the kitchen, and her keys weren't on the counter. I kept walking. The front door was locked. I went outside. The fence was closed, and there was no trace of her car. I came back to my mom's room. I don't know what my face looked like, but she immediately asked, "What happened?" I told her, and she called my sister. She said she was still at work and would be coming home late. The thing is, something similar happened a few weeks ago. My sister now has a daughter, almost 3 years old. They were hanging in the same room and heard my mom coming home. My niece even said, "Grandma!" and they waited. My sister did the same as me and called my mom, but she hadn't come home. Story 5. I Heard My Dad's Voice from the Future by Older Sister 5. This happened about 12 years ago when I was around 17 and my little sister was about 7 or 8. She doesn't remember much of it, but I do, mainly because I think about it so often. It's one of those experiences that I can't explain, and for someone as skeptical as me, that's very unsettling. It was summer vacation, and I was babysitting my little sister while both my parents were at work. I have another sister, 2 years younger than me, but she wasn't home on that particular day. We lived on the second floor of an old Chicago townhouse, with a front entrance and a back porch that led directly into the kitchen. That day, my little sister and I were both in the living room, me watching TV and her playing some computer game. She was losing and let out a curse word, which, at the time, she was starting to do more often. She was usually a very well-behaved kid, but my parents were trying to break the habit by putting her in timeout whenever they caught her swearing. So, following their rule, I sent her to sit in the kitchen for 5 minutes. I kept watching TV, completely losing track of time. It wasn't until my show ended that I realized over 40 minutes had gone by. I felt awful as I rushed to the kitchen, ready to apologize for leaving her in there so long. But just as I got close, I heard something I really didn't expect. I heard whistling. It was strange for 2 reasons. First, I had never heard my little sister whistle before. And second, this wasn't just a random whistling, it was a tune. A deliberate, steady melody. At first, I felt even worse, thinking I had left her there so long that she had managed to teach herself how to whistle. But as I stood there listening, something started to feel off. The sound didn't sound like it was coming from my sister at all. It sounded older, deeper, familiar in a way. It sounded exactly like my dad. My dad did usually come in through the back door when he got home from work, so for a split second I thought maybe he had gotten home early. But that didn't make sense. He wasn't due back at least for another 3 or 4 hours. Still, the resemblance was uncanny. The pitch, the rhythm, the way the notes lingered for just a second too long, it was his whistle. I started walking slower and started to get annoyed because I knew once my sister told him how long I'd left her alone in there for, I'd probably be in trouble. I slowly poked my head in, expecting to see both of them, but instead, I found my sister alone and completely knocked out, head resting on her arms, fast asleep. But the whistling was still going on. The sound was right there, filling the room. It wasn't coming from my sister. It wasn't coming from outside. It was just there. I don't remember how long I stood there, listening, trying to make sense of what I was hearing. Eventually, I ran to the back door, yanking it open, expecting to see someone standing outside. No one was there. I ran to the windows, looking down, looking around. Nothing. But the entire time, that damn whistling never stopped. It was still in the kitchen, even as I stepped out onto the porch, even as I backed away. It wasn't following me. It was staying in the room, right where I had left my sleeping sister. I panicked. I grabbed my sister, barely waking her up as I carried her out of the house, and ran straight to my friend's place down the street. I waited there until my mom got home. When I told her what had happened, she brushed it off. She barely reacted, didn't seem to care, and honestly, that made me feel even crazier. So I just stopped talking about it. I never told my dad or my other sister. But here's the part that still makes my stomach drop whenever I think about it. A few days later, when my dad did come home from work, he walked in through the back door, and he was whistling the exact same tune I had heard in the kitchen days before. The exact same one. I don't have an explanation. I've thought about every possible logical answer, but nothing fits. It wasn't an echo. It wasn't someone outside, and it definitely wasn't my sister. I've never told anyone this story since, but I still think about it all the time. Story 6. Jack the Ripper, identified? As you may have already heard, Jack the Ripper is making headlines again, 137 years after his crimes were committed. Jari Luhalainen, a biochemist at Liverpool John Moores University in the United Kingdom, and David Miller, a reproduction and sperm expert at the University of Leeds in the United Kingdom, recently published the results of DNA testing on evidence from the homicide scene of Jack the Ripper's 4th victim, Catherine Eddowes. They claim that their testing has conclusively linked Aaron Kamiński, a Polish barber living and working in Whitechapel at the time of the murders, to evidence at the crime scene, thereby proving that Kosminski is, without a doubt, Jack the Ripper. So who was Aaron Kosminski, and how did he become linked to arguably the most notorious serial homicide case in history? Kosminski was born in Poland on September 11, 1865, and immigrated to England sometime in the 1880s. At the time of the murders, he was working as a barber in the Whitechapel area of London, an area notorious for prostitution and vice. The 5 homicides occurred between August 31st and November 9th, 1888. The killer targeted prostitutes, and all but his third victim, Elizabeth Stride, were horrifically mutilated. While violent acts committed against prostitutes were not uncommon, the brutal nature of these homicides led police to believe that the cases were connected and were the work of a single killer. Police records from the time list a Kosminski as a suspect, describing him as a Polish immigrant committed to an insane asylum, but the records did not list a first name for the suspect. In 1987, a journalist identified Aaron Kosminski as the suspect listed in the records by cross-referencing police and asylum records with private notes from detectives who worked on the Jack the Ripper case. Aaron Kosminski was committed to an insane asylum in 1891 after threatening his sister with a knife and was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. The notes of Detective Sir Melville MacNaughton stated that Kosminski had a great hatred of women with strong homicidal tendencies and indicated that he was a strong suspect in the murders. Despite these suspicions, the police were never able to definitively link anyone to the crimes. With the advent of DNA testing in the late 20th century, researchers and true crime enthusiasts became hopeful that a conclusion could be reached in the case. DNA tests have been conducted on multiple pieces of evidence, with author Patricia Cornwell hiring a forensic team to test stamps and envelopes from letters supposedly sent by Jack the Ripper. As a result of these tests, Cornwell believes that a man named Walter Sickert is the guilty party. The scientists who conducted the most recent tests have claimed their testing is the most systematic and most advanced genetic analysis to date regarding the Jack the Ripper murders. The researchers took samples from a shawl stained with blood and semen that was found at one of the crime scenes next to the body of Catherine Eddowes, and were able to match DNA from the semen sample to Aaron Kosminski. Critics are skeptical of the results for several reasons. The first being that the evidence is over 100 years old and the possibility of contamination is high. Others question the reliability of the type of DNA testing used in this instance. The scientists used mitochondrial DNA to conduct their tests. Mitochondrial DNA is often easier to extract in older degraded samples while still providing enough genetic information to work with. The downside to working with mitochondrial DNA, however, is that it doesn't provide a full genetic profile and is not specific enough to be used in all situations. Mitochondrial DNA is inherited from the maternal side and traces a person's maternal heritage, unlike nuclear DNA, which is inherited from both parents. Hansi Weissensteiner, an expert in mitochondrial DNA at Innsbruck Medical University in Austria, stated, "Based on mitochondrial DNA, one can only exclude a suspect." This being said, mitochondrial DNA does not provide enough detail to prove that a DNA sample belongs to a specific individual. The way the research was published has raised concerns as well. The article, published in the Journal of Forensic Sciences, lacks technical details, instead choosing to describe the DNA match using graphic representation via illustration. The scientists cite their reasoning for publishing their results this way as being easier for true crime enthusiasts without a scientific background to understand. Walter Parson, a forensic scientist at the Institute of Legal Medicine at Innsbruck Medical University in Austria, expressed his confusion at this decision, as these technical details are important for peer review and the ability to judge the accuracy of the results. As mitochondrial DNA sequences do not pose a risk of privacy invasion to the individuals involved, he believes these results should have been included to prove the validity of the testing. Otherwise, the reader cannot judge the result. I wonder where science and research are going when we start to avoid showing results, but instead present colored boxes, he stated. While the results are exciting and perhaps a step closer to discovering the true identity of Jack the Ripper, it seems as though his identity will remain a mystery until more conclusive proof arises. As DNA technology continues to advance, we remain hopeful that better testing methods await in the near future. For now, we are left to speculate and weigh the evidence at hand. Thank you for joining me for this episode of The Dread Weaver. I'll be back next week with more terrifying true tales. If you would like to submit a story of your own, head to our subreddit r/thedreadweaver or send us an email at thedreadweaver@outlook.com. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share with your friends, and click the bell icon to turn on notifications if you want to hear more. Until our paths cross again in the shadows, stay vigilant and beware the whispers of the night. This is the Dreadweaver, signing off.